Okay, so we just went live. Thank you, Liz, for joining us on Extinction Rebellion's Facebook page on our second Rebel Talk. This talk today is on climate and ecological justice. We'll be looking at the extractive industry and what it means for the Global South. So for everyone tuning in, Liz is an active rebel, a deep ecology practitioner and a campaigner with the Rainforest Information Centre. Liz has spent a total of about 14 months in Ecuador since 2013. And I was just wondering, firstly, if you could speak a little bit about your work in Ecuador and what compelled you to campaign for the forest and Indigenous peoples there.
Okay, yep. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, sure. Anyway, yeah, so I've been going to Latin America for a number of years, until recently, for fairly obvious reasons. Started out doing a student internship for my master's in international development and community development. Worked with some Quechua communities. I then went out with some NGOs to the Amazon rainforest and participated in some projects that were being sort of ecotourism and land protection projects being set up by Indigenous people of the Sapra and the Warani nations out there. And then quickly became very apparent that the extractive industry is completely feral and out of control in Ecuador. So we have oil companies out there drilling in the Amazon right now, and that's probably been, that's been quite on the news over the past year or so. But also an even bigger problem is mining. And so I hopped on a campaign the year before last that had been started up by the Rainforest Information Centre, which is a very small Australian grassroots organisation, and who had been working in Ecuador at a grassroots level for a number of years. So we started to get onto these mining companies, and the more we found out, the worse it got. And we've been running this campaign ever since, pretty much.
Okay, great. Oh, thank you for introducing yourself and your work in Ecuador. So my first question to you is regarding what is actually happening in Ecuador right now. I heard from media reports that it is one of the most challenging places at the moment regarding COVID-19. And I was wondering if you could sort of give us some update as to what's going on the ground there.
Okay, so Ecuador is one of the smaller countries in Latin America. It's got a struggling economy. It's a fairly typical, what you'd call a developing nation, up to its eyeballs in debt to the International Monetary Fund and to China. And so anyway, a lot of poverty. And for some reason, it's been hit really badly by the coronavirus. We're not really sure why, but one of the coastal cities, the biggest coastal city, Guayaquil, the official death toll is only something like 470, which is still a large death toll, but reports are coming in all the time that it's actually running into the thousands. And the reason for the discrepancy is that there's just such limited testing facilities, and because of the overcrowding situations, we have bodies being left for days, unable to be collected, people dying in their houses. It's absolutely heartbreaking. Anyway, so that's what's going on with the virus. What's also going on, which is of great concern to those of us who are environmental organisations working with Ecuadorian people at the moment, is that mining companies in particular are basically appearing to be using the cover of the pandemic lockdowns as an excuse to get out there and continue to do their explorations, and that's allowed and mandated by the government. The government considers mining to be an essential sector. So, people are still going out into the field, and the worry is at the moment that in countries that are connected to the Amazon region, these industries are now taking the virus into Indigenous communities who have no immunity whatsoever. So that's the beginning of a nutshell of what we're dealing with at the moment.
Yeah. So they're facing a sort of twin crisis there, and they're particularly vulnerable, I assume. And presumably they can't protest either, being in lockdown.
Yeah. So protests are actually have been problematic for a while anyway, even before the lockdown. Protests have had in most Latin American countries get cracked down on very heavily. And activism is, shall we say, not encouraged. So, yeah.
Okay. And so bringing us to the issue of climate and ecological justice, Extinction Rebellion includes this in their third demand when they ask for a citizens' assembly to create solutions based on climate and ecological justice. So for our listeners out there, I was wondering if you could sort of talk about the link between the climate crisis and the ecological crisis and the extractive industry as it plays out in the global south.
Okay, yes. So, this is a pet subject of mine, obviously, because working in the international development field. It's something that, it goes down to this very complex interrelationship between global capitalism and how that has actually created the global south, how, decades and hundreds of years of exploitation and colonization have created a disparity between rich and poor, a division across the world in terms of rich countries exploiting poor countries. And then within both rich and poor countries, we have poorer classes of people who are, more disadvantaged and more oppressed. So there's a massive social justice issue entwined. And then when it comes to, obviously, with climate and not just climate, but ecological destruction, both of these things disproportionately impact on disadvantaged people. And the disadvantaged people within disadvantaged countries, of course, are disproportionately impacted even more. So, it's very complex. What we're getting right now with COVID, with the coronavirus pandemic, is that this is like a third thing that's impacting disproportionately. The coronavirus has only just started to get a foothold in places like Africa and Asia. Well, not Asia's parts of Asia have already kind of, they've been dealing with it for months, but other parts is only just coming in. We're seeing the riots and the desperation on the news. We're seeing people who have no resources. We're seeing impacts on the aid industry, because that actually. Or my industry is environmental organisations and aid organisations until now have utterly depended upon, pools of middle-class donors from rich nations. And what we're seeing now suddenly, as the world is getting plunged into a very fast recession, is that those donations are drying up. So no longer can we just chuck money and feel better about it at people who are struggling on the front lines of these extractive industries. So that's another dimension. When it comes to extractive industries, that's kind of a fourth complication that people are dealing with. So, mining, fracking, oil, gas, etc., logging. These companies have obviously been exploiting Indigenous people, in particular, for a very, very long time. But what we're seeing now is that because the GDPs of so many countries are utterly dependent upon the fossil fuels and the mining industries, And so these industries are being encouraged, not discouraged, during the pandemic. They're even cashing in. Companies like BHP are out there boasting right now that we are going to keep our share prices up during the pandemic and protect our shareholders. And we're going to keep exploring for copper, because as soon as we come out of lockdown, we're going to need copper, because that's going to be the new global industry for the renewable sector, and it becomes incredibly complex. And the people that don't have a say in any of this, of course, are the people who are being directly impacted already by climate, ecological destruction, the virus, and extractive industries. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really frustrating. I find also working in this area as well, that it's often the most disadvantaged who get impacted, but are the least likely to contribute to the issues in terms of the causes of the crisis. And that's where the justice element comes in. And I think Extinction Rebellion has a real responsibility to sort of raise these issues when they talk about demanding action around these issues without sort of getting to the crux or the very core of the causes. We can't really expect to see the real change that's required, in my view. So I just wanted to also then unpack or if you could speak a bit about what the campaign is around Ecuador at the moment, the Indigenous groups there for the Rainforest Information Centre, and speak a little bit about more specifically what the issues they're facing there with regards to Australian companies, perhaps.
Cool. So Australian mining sector has a very strong hold in Ecuador, and that's why Ecuador is important. We get the question all the time with our campaign, well, why Ecuador? We've got shit going on down here, and we've also got we've got some of the other countries who've got a really strong hold in Papua New Guinea, Malaysia. We've got countries closer to home that are being exploited badly and have Indigenous populations who are being exploited. And we also have our own Indigenous people who are being exploited. So, but the thing that we're sort of zoned in on this, because it's kind of like, well, no one's actually doing it. And it's actually really important because right now, in 2017, Ecuador sold over 2 million hectares of its landmass to international mining companies. And they did that because they, as I've said before, they're up to their eyeballs in debt, international debt. Their bottom had dropped out of the oil prices, so they were looking at not being able to drill the Amazon. And they thought, yay, let's go to mining. Awesome. Let's open the country up to massive foreign investment with no scruples whatsoever and no consultation whatsoever and no regulation whatsoever. Of course, and Ecuador, the mineral that it is rich in is copper. And what the world wants copper for is renewable energies, electric cars and technologies generally. The bulk of the world's copper at the moment goes to China for making gadgets, the same as, cobalt and other minerals. So anyway, what we have is now 5 companies: Gina Reinhardt, BHP, Twiggy Forrest, Newcrest, SolGold. These are 5 big Australian companies. They have flocked to Ecuador and bought up about 40% of the total concessions available. Wow. The rest mainly Canadian. We've got a few Chilean and a few Chinese companies in there as well, but Australians are big in there. So anyway, so we're just like, well, how do we start to, tackle this? And BHP's a, very big company. We have been doing a bit of investor shareholder activism, because a lot of shareholders are wanting to know that their companies are doing ethical things. BHP has made a public commitment to phase out of fossil fuels by 2050, which is pathetic, but it's something. They have declared a climate emergency. They did that in London last year, and Andrew Mackenzie, the chairperson, was like, we are clean and green. We are going into the renewable energy sector. We're going to phase out coal. We're wonderful. At the same time, we're working with local rural people in northwestern Ecuador who were struggling, having to put out roadblocks to stop BHP employees entering completely without consultation or permission, doing explorations, signing contracts and deals with the government behind the community's backs. The mines there that are being planned, Sol Gold's already in there, and they've touted, this could be the world's biggest copper production mine. It could be as big as Escondido in Chile, which is a massive copper mine owned by BHP. The trouble is that what we've got is the world's most mega biodiverse region, the tropical Andes hotspot zone. It's got more species of everything: plants, animals, amphibians, insects, birds, mammals, per hectare than anywhere else in the world. So massively biodiverse. We've got Indigenous territories in there. We've got a lot of Australian companies that are burrowing around at the moment in Shuar territory, and the Shuar are actually the one Indigenous nation at the moment, that's the first Indigenous nation to have reported COVID-19 deaths due to mining activity in their territory. So, yeah, that's pretty much the nutshell of what we're dealing with in Ecuador. Trading companies.
Wow, sounds incredible. Like, to think that 40% of that concession, of the 2 million, I presume, they own, so that's nearly a million.
It's about, we think it's around 37%, but it's hard to tell because concessions are always there's new ones coming online, and that information isn't being made public. So we're estimating about 37%.
Wow. And so I understand that the Ecuadorian constitution has a requirement for free, prior, informed consent.
Yep.
And so essentially, wouldn't that mean that the Australian companies are not abiding by the local laws or the domestic laws there by just coming in without consultation?
Yep. So, that's true. All companies who have bought up these concessions, in essence, are not abiding by the Constitution. However, this is where we get into the complexities of working with developing countries in the global south, because we've got desperate governments. We've got governments who are nearly bankrupt. They need the mining in their mines. So they have done all the loopholes possible to open up the country to foreign investment. It's going to need a much bigger solution than just looking at constitutional rights, because Ecuador actually has an amazing constitution. It's the only country in the world to have enshrined the rights of nature in its constitution. There have been about 20 cases in the last decade that have been won based on the rights of nature. And FPIC is another one, free, prior and informed consent, that is a constitutional right. So what we had in 2018 and the beginning of 2019 was a number of communities, particularly those who could get a bit of funding help from outside, were able to set up legal cases and win them based on these constitutional rights. And that all went really well until August, when Ecuador had made a deal with the International Monetary Fund back in February, and in August the people basically revolted and started, it basically closed the country down for a couple of weeks. the government just from then on have been pretty much cracking down on cases against extractive industries, because in their minds, this is the only way they're going to get out of their debt and out of strife. And after COVID-19, it's going to be even more of a prerogative. So yeah, they basically, we had all these, we were supporting a few legal cases out there as Rainforest Information Centre. And, these are, a couple have been put on hold. They're being appealed. There's all kinds of corruption going on behind the scenes. So there's no guarantee that constitutional rights are going to be upheld, basically.
Yeah, I remember seeing some footage around that time when, was it October of 2019 when
early October.
Then took to the streets in frustration there. Does the Rainforest Information Centre support the sort of direct action type activism and,
Yeah, well, we do. I have to make a proviso that it gets very tricky, because obviously direct action, it has to, we support peaceful resistance, non-violent direct action. We support legal funds. We support, community development projects, all of those kinds of things. But where, of course, it's getting tricky is that people are getting desperate at the grassroots right now, and there are various things that are happening that we can't support. So we basically stick to rainforest protection, and grassroots projects. So a lot of what we funded this year, and for the first 3 months of this year until the lockdowns hit, we were funding a number of community meetings and assemblies of up to 1,500, 2,000 people in the northwest of Ecuador, who were basically producing legal documents which they can present as on behalf of civil society to government bodies, saying we don't want mining in our territories. So it's a very peaceful, very intelligent actions that are happening out there on the ground, and all they need is a bit of funds and resources to get the experts out there, to get the scientists, on board, to get to get these documents written and distributed. So we've also distributed a lot of information through the team I work with. Is a team of volunteers in the Melbourne Rainforest Action Group, an amazing, very small group of people. We tend to have had trouble getting volunteers for our campaign because there's just so much stuff going on that people are engaged with. We've basically taken on the task of writing a lot of detailed reports on all the Australian mining companies. We've distributed those reports in Spanish to Ecuadorian grassroots environmental organisations, so they've got information, because information is key, isn't it? If they know who they're facing, they've got more power. And that's our aim, really, to just, in small ways, empower communities, empower their projects, empower their peaceful resistance. Yeah, and also get awareness happening in Australia of how we are actually linked to all of this, and how we actually need to start looking at the big picture, because it's all, we are implicated. Our entire economy is based on mining. These companies we're talking about basically run our government. In terms of the advisory boards and the lobby groups and the Minerals Council and all of this, it's up to us to keep these companies accountable. It's, if we have to have mining, we have to have just mining. And there's currently no, Canada has a watchdog called Canada Mining Watch that's got a bit of support, a bit of funding. We haven't. All we've got is we've got a national contact point for due diligence of companies operating overseas, and a very small couple of underfunded not-for-profit organisations that funnel cases into that. But we've got no way of really monitoring or regulating how companies operate, and without a justice perspective, we're not going to get it. We have to start thinking of how to mobilise in a way that is basically doing what the government isn't doing, which is providing a justice framework to keep companies honest and operating. It's just not happening at the moment. So it's a bit of a long-winded answer.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent answer. And I was starting to think about that. Like, what are the issues that you see sort of stopping the campaign from building momentum in Australia? And I guess you sort of answered that, the distance, but also that the information isn't out there. Do you have something you could something that you could ask of people who want to take action, or concerned citizens that are interested in this issue? What could they do to help? So essentially, what I heard from your talk is your answers is that mining companies are deforesting, and Australian mining companies who have got access to land are deforesting mega diverse areas of Indigenous and protected forest. Is it protected?
Yeah, protected. Yeah. Well, essentially protected forest, yes.
Or should be. Yeah. For renewable energy. And I just see it doesn't make sense to me, because the need for renewable energy is because we are seeing an issue with the climate, but we certainly can't address climate change through deforestation. So sorry, long question. What could people do in Australia to support or stand in solidarity with the Indigenous people in Ecuador fighting off these Australian companies?
Cool. Yeah. So I guess the first thing is sort of I want to just quickly recap, just to understand the link between renewable energies and this kind of mining. Actually, at the moment, when we're talking about minerals like copper, there's not a lot of copper. The bulk of the copper is still going to our gadgets, but all the mining companies are greenwashing madly and trying to. They want to cash in to the next big renewables boom, and that's just basically what we're talking about at the moment. They're thinking about their profits, and so it's not that it's evil to go and buy an electric car tomorrow. I mean, we still obviously need to draw down carbon really quickly, but there has been, I believe, an unbalanced focus on drawing down carbon and not enough of focus on justice and the ecological destruction side of these issues. To me, it's a three-part issue. And if we focus actually, I would say three-part issue, but justice is the core. Justice is the bottom of it. If we can put justice at the bottom rather than carbon at the bottom, we might start to see more avenues in which we could stand up and take action. No, it's not just about getting. We have to get cities carbon free, yes, but if you think about it, all over the world, it's only going to be the rich cities and the rich countries that are going to be able to do that anytime soon. The minerals are going to need to come from somewhere. It's and I kind of feel like people are paralyzed, by this. But we can't do anything until we deal with this climate thing. But there's so much you can do by supporting small organisations who are dealing with just different front lines around the world. Find an organisation that speaks to your heart, who was working in solidarity with an Indigenous group who was struggling against an extractive, for example. Or find an organisation that is supporting a forest. Get behind them and support them, or 2 or 3. You know, many people in Tassie are supporting the Tarkine. You know, what is interesting is that basically what's going on in the Tarkine is what's going on in Ecuador at the moment, only on a much, much, much bigger scale. So if you're interested in Tarkine and forest issues, why not hop on the Rainforest Information Centre? We haven't received a single donation since the end of last year because everybody dried up, and that's understandable, but we also can't run a campaign without donations. We can't help people and support people without donations. We have to find a way for people to just start to see the links. And so I'm not saying everyone has to support us, but there's other organisations out there that are working on front lines. And I'll just put up what I'm going to share the screen. Hang on, let's try this. Okay, share screen, and then I'm going to put this up. Oh, I'm not actually sure if this is going to work because there's a big thing in the way. No, it's actually not going to work. That's really disappointing. Okay, never mind. What I'm going to do after this is post in the event page. I'm going to just get out of share because that's just ridiculous. Oh, I don't know how to do that.
Technology, we're all trying to
dear
with it.
I've got these things up on my screen that I can't remove. Okay, can you see?
Are you wearing your funky pants today too?
I'm not wearing my funky. Oh, I'm wearing a pair of funky pants, but not the funky pants.
Not the funky pants. Well, okay. Well, I'll get all the details from you, Liz, and we can post that up for people on the Facebook page. And yeah, thank you so much for today and for really showing up and explaining a bit about the work that you do in Ecuador. And you're really inspiring to me and I think to other rebels too. And thank you also to your active hope work that you do with Extinction Rebellion. It's been really, I think, beneficial for a lot of people to be able to have access to such an incredible framework for dealing with the sort of anxiety that comes with being an activist in this space. Yeah, so thank you.
Can I just add one last thing?
Yeah, of course.
Quickly, this is quite important. So part of the actions, what I'll post up on the event page, there's a petition you can sign to help the Shuar Indigenous people deal with the mining companies bringing coronavirus into their territory. That came out the other day, so you can hop on. It is all in Spanish, unfortunately, but there's a big red box that basically says sign here in Spanish. You can just sign it, or you can Google translate. We're trying to get an international one up in English, but it's taking a few days. So that's that. You can do that. You can also put $10 into a couple of different crowd funds that are helping Indigenous communities in the Amazon right now. One of them is our crowd fund and one of them is Amazon Frontlines. So they're really easy ways. And the third thing I really want to reiterate is that when you're a campaigner, what's really, really helps is if people like and share posts and interact and not just like, but, you know, put love and the wow signs on, because that actually bumps our posts up, bumps our messages up, and they can be more seen by Google searches and other search engines. And so instead of, you know, what we've been seeing is that people are so overwhelmed with issues to, you know, that we post something in our page and 3 people look at it. Well, that's not going to help, you know, Leo DiCaprio see our post, is it? So just, you know, even if you don't have much time, just hop on our pages, like and love, whatever it is, Bob Brown Foundation, any organisation that you support, and that actually really helps us get the message out there. It's a really easy way to take action. It's a little plug.
Excellent. And given the challenges we face with the algorithms and different interfering groups that sort of try to skew those, it's so important that we do that and create a movement of movements, I think. So yeah, I'm really happy to have interviewed today, and I also just wanted to flag that to those tuning in Extinction Rebellion are really starting to discuss this issue of climate and ecological justice, and I think it will only further maturize our movement. And there is a fourth demand that some countries are looking at, or some local groups are looking at, around a just transition and ecological and climate justice and and standing in solidarity with Indigenous sovereignty. I hope that maybe we can get together sometime, Liz, to see if we can advance that maybe in Australia, given our needs here too for Indigenous populations. So for those wanting to learn a bit more about Extinction Rebellion, global justice issues, I'll post some stuff about that too, and groups that you can join that are looking specifically at that. So yeah, thanks again, Liz, and I'm sure I'll be seeing you soon.
Yes, thank you so much.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.